So we're just walking in to the sacred temple oracle site of Dodona. Not only is it linked with Delphi and Delos along a great alignment called the Apollo-Athena line that stretches all the way up to Britain to St. Michael's Mount, Skellig Michael. The ancients believed that the Oracle of Dodona was the oldest one by far. I believe we're now walking up to the most sacred part of the site. This is the great oracular oak tree. So we're just walking in to the sacred temple oracle site of Dodona, which is, about an hour from Parga where we're staying, and it is an amazing place because not only is it linked with Delphi and Delos along a great alignment called the Apollo-Athena line that stretches all the way up to Britain to St. Michael's Mount, Skellig Michael, and Mont Saint-Michel in France. Also goes down to Megiddo in Israel. But the thing about this place is that Dodona here, Delphi and Delos are all exactly 1 degree of latitude apart from each other, and they're all on an alignment coming from northwest down to southeast, the Apollo-Athena line. So that in itself suggests there's something very significant about these particular sites. But anyway, we're going to get in there and take a closer look, because not only is it an oracle site with some very interesting features, of course, as we're finding everywhere on our trip, there are polygonal walls here. So let's get in there and take a closer look. So we're just walking in to the main part of Dodona, and already we can see this fairly impressive wall, something we're kind of slightly obsessed by. I want to take a look at this carefully because just to see if it is actually polygonal, if it's cyclopean, or if it's just the sort of classic Hellenistic style. To me at the moment it looks kind of Hellenistic, so this would have been built around the 4th century BC. But we've read that it's not just that, there's actually some earlier part here as well. So we'll see if we can locate the prehistoric section of the site, which goes back to the time potentially of the Danians or the Pelasgians. And you can see we're coming into the main auditorium here. Now this auditorium is interesting in its own right. This would have held 18,000 people. Yeah, that's for real. But yeah, the stones are pretty big here. This is not a small site. I thought it was just going to be a small oracular spot, not much else going on, but this is pretty major. So at least they're preserving this site and recognizing its importance, which I think is important. It's got to be done. So we'll just head into the main part here, walk through this entranceway. Ah, here we go. Look at this. This is pretty remarkable. And you can see inside it, there is some quite large kind of slabs. And we saw a similar thing at the castle in Argos, which I think is quite intriguing. I think this actual platform I'm walking on was actually just for the builders. I want to take advantage of this to get some nice shots various parts of the site. And you see these slabs, it's almost like the grave circle at Mycenaean, the upright slabs, and also similar to what we've seen at a couple of other sites. But yeah, imagine 18,000 people could sit in this somehow. That's quite impressive. So here we have some of the blocks that make up the wall. Now these are kind of classic Hellenistic. They're slightly puffy, but they're not really polygonal or cyclopean. Some of them are quite big, but not that big. Just want to point that out. When we compare it to other sites we're looking at around Greece, travellers and literati since the 18th century have persistently sought after the site of Dodona because it's renowned as the ancient oracle site, the first oracle site of Greece with the sacred oak tree of Phagos, which is an ancient Greek literary tradition. It was first really identified in 1832 by British traveller C. Lincoln, and it was continued to be excavated up until the 1960s, and then it became a proper kind of tourist site in the 2000s, and it has been proven archaeologically that it was the oldest Greek oracle shrine, and the beginnings of a cult at the site go back to prehistoric times, to the 3rd millennium BC, with the nature goddess Gaia, or Mother Earth, worshipped here. And she is also connected with tree worship and prophecy, and that was also venerated here as the oracular activities were too. So most people would come here for the ancient theatre. I would imagine only those that have read the work of Jean Riker, Robert Temple, Paul Broadhurst, Hamish Miller, and of course C.Rhone and John Michell would actually be aware of this as a very important placed site in the greater landscape, the greater world geography, the sacred geography certainly of this part of the world, you know, especially because it links directly with Skellig Michael, Mont Saint-Michel, St. Michael's Mount, and other sanctuaries dedicated to St. Michael all through Europe. But also it turns into the sanctuaries of Apollo as we come through Greece, through Rhodes, obviously through here, through Delos, through the Necromantium, down through Delphi and Gla, into Athens and beyond to the island of Delos, where there's a sanctuary there, an oracular site, which would have been equally important in a sense. But this is certainly the oldest one, although in Delos we know that that's where Apollo was born. Delphi is famous in its own right. That's really the center of the world. It's really the center, the Omphalos, and the Omphalos stone is there suggesting this, but it's the center of the world, much like we have these naval kind of cultures where we're looking at the Potbelly Hill in Göbekli Tepe, we have the Coricancha in Cuzco is the navel of the world, and so on and so forth. And so we know this is certainly a thing. So the idea that this is like part of a great survey really does inspire me. It does kind of get me, because we have not only, you know, do we have the latitudes coming up from a place called Babet or Bayabet in northern Egypt. It's pretty much on the same meridian as Giza, but it's up on the north coast in the delta. And from there, Delos, Delphi and Dodona, and we're at the very top point here. And this latitude as well, it's exactly the same latitude, exactly the same spot, on the same parallel as Mount Ararat in ancient Anatolia, where Noah's Ark was supposed to have been landed, and then, you know, life continued from there. And a dove was sent out there, the same as here. We have this dove connection, and we saw the doves marked at the Hieros site we visited a couple of days ago, suggesting this is a symbol of surveying, this is a symbol of navigation, this is a symbol of, you know, working out where you are on the planet and marking these sites as sacred centres throughout the world. So we also have a kind of ukit here, which is something that JJ's been researching, where there's an orientation through a valley between two mountains, and it could be part of the tradition here at Dodona. Around the 2nd millennium BC, Zeus was kind of introduced, and it became more patriarchal with the incoming Mycenaeans and other cultures. Priestesses known as the Pleiades, which is obviously linked with the stars of that group, were devoted to the worship of the chthonic goddess, while priests known as Eloi or Seloi served Zeus. There's also Mycenaean dating here from the mid-2nd millennium BC up to 1200 BC. And things changed with the Dorian invasion, and bronze offerings and votive pieces were found here from the 8th century BC up until the 5th century BC. And eventually it passed into the possession of the mightiest Epirite tribe, the Molossi. And during the Molossian League, 4th century to 342 BC, things changed here, and eventually the reconstruction of the sanctuary was instigated. And it's a really, really interesting site, and it was even used up in Roman times as well. And the similarities to Egypt, obviously we have the Ptolemaic connection, but look at these protrusions coming out on this rock here. What do we know about that? I mean, are they just to move the stone, or is that actually a similar style to what we get in Egypt? Here we have some very ruined, battered stones here, but these conglomerate stone bowls are quite interesting, and parts of pillars. Look at these, it's complete ruins. They look very, very ancient. So one of the things about this site that really gets me is this, the positioning of the site, the oracular nature of the site, which we'll try and find where we think that might have been. But the ancients believed that the Oracle of Dodona was the oldest one by far. There were traditions as well linking it with surveying, and this is symbolized with the doves who flew from Thebes in Egypt. One went to Libya and located the place of the sanctuary of Zeus Ammon, and the other reached Dodona, where he sat in an oak tree, the sacred tree of Zeus. And from the rustling of the leaves of the tree and the flying of birds who nestled in the branches, the diviners of Zeus interpreted the counsel of the divinity. And in the 8th century precinct, the Peribolos was arranged with bronze basins around the sacred tree, and these would all touch each other in this circular fashion, almost like a bronze basin circle around the tree. The first small temple of Zeus and 3 Ionic stoas were built around 400 BC. It was replaced by a larger one in Hellenistic times, where they think officially that's where the polygonal walls came from, but we're not so sure. We think they're from a much earlier culture because of the dating that goes back to 2720 BC with the Hellinikon pyramid near Argos. The sanctuary complex included the Beleuterion, the council house, where they held council and had meetings, so it was almost like a moot or ting or kind of omphalos site as well. And there were various festivals that were carried out here in honour of Zeus, all the way to the 4th century AD, when the sort of cult faded and became less known and the oak tree was cut down. I believe we're now walking up to the most sacred part of the site. This is the great oracular oak tree, well, probably a one that's been planted again. So we're just looking over at the temple of Zeus, which was only really built in the 5th century BC. But it was said that the god dwelt in the roots of the prophetic oak tree and was worshipped in the open air. And it was here that the priest pronounced oracles according to the rustling of the leaves of the sacred tree, the flight and cawings of the birds that nested in its branches, and other signs and symbols they would have read. But from the 8th century BC, the oak was encircled by adjoining bronze cauldrons on tripods, and they were later moved. And so questions were submitted in writing incised on lead tablets, and the answers were only derived orally and very occasionally written on the reverse of the template. With the beautiful mountains in the background, we have the temple of Zeus, with a replica of the ancient oracular oak tree, which had bronze cauldrons placed around it. We have the new temple of Dion, which was built several hundred years later. Beautiful megalithic blocks in it though. And then we have the earlier Christian basilica here. And we'll just keep walking around this part. We'll see some almost like betel stones up there, but these are probably bases of pillars. And over here we have the temple of Heracles, so even Hercules had a thing going on at Dodona, and you can see some of the megalithic blocks in his temple. And yeah, there's not too much to see here. It's a very beautiful, very interesting site, and we have what's left up here of stunning stonework and pillars, but you know, they've kind of shaped themselves through over years of rain and weathering to actually look like omphalos stones, which is quite intriguing. And there was supposed to be an omphalos stone here like we find at Delphi. Where that is, we don't know, but we'll have a look in the museums to see what else we can find. Here we have the old temple of Dion, which is probably one of the earliest structures here at the site. But we know that this was a prehistoric site. We know there were powerful earth energy currents moving through here, thanks to Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst. We know it's a famous oracle site, and we also know that its location is relevant in relation to sites not only in Egypt but also in Libya and other parts of the world, and it's on the same latitude as Mount Ararat, with the same mythos associated with it, with the doves. And here we have the sacred house, which just behind there with the tree, with the replica of the tree, well, a real tree obviously, but the tree would have been in there. So yeah, it's just amazing to be here. I'm fascinated by these oracle sites, and there's just lots of connections we're finding here. This is another connection. Look at this. On this block of stone here, we have one of those protrusions, much like we find in ancient Egypt and Peru. And what else do we have here? We have another one around this side. That's pretty interesting. And what I thought was a keystone cut, in fact that is a keystone cut. There's two here on the side of this stone. So that is intriguing. So we're finding the same kind of techniques and styles, different parts of the world, also here in ancient Greece. So in the structures just over there, just behind this first layer of stones, is what's called the Pyrotenion. Now this is the seat of Pyrotenis, and it housed the eternal fire, and was also the place where representatives of the Epirite tribes and other official guests were accommodated and dined. So they had this also a tradition here of an eternal fire, which is something we do find in various other places. But this is a bit later. This is coming into like 4th, 3rd century BC, which was long after the oracle had been in use, possibly for thousands of years. This long smooth area was the Bouleuterion, and this again was used by the Epirite alliance from 342 to 233 BC, and here they would assemble up to the, going as far back as the 4th century BC. It's a large rectangular hall with 17 columns, and it's said that there was an altar of Zeus here, of Dion and Zeus Boulios, which were used for sacrifices and the swearing of oaths of council members. There are more keystone cuts on this particular block here. We came in, there's no one here at all, but we're going to head out now. But it's well worth a visit if you're interested in ancient structures here in ancient Greece.